The bet was made after a few glasses of whiskey. It was a big bet, made after our protagonist was asked to give his opinion on the attractiveness of various female colleagues. Thumbs up, thumbs down. There was no obvious lung girl in the office behavior, but there were flirts with lush breasts, long legs, and short skirts. There were several disagreements. Voices were raised in alcohol disputes. But there was a consensus on one issue. Young Susan, a new girl in the production, was perfectly attractive, but no one present could imagine that she would betray her husband. The ring on her finger, the gold cross on her neck, the simple clothes served as a wall, blocking the male gaze, preventing a male approach. Our main character was a famous Romeo among his friends. Women found him interesting. His comrades found his exploits both fascinating to retell and exasperating. It was too easy for him. The description of the Saturday night club on Mondays contrasted with their own marital tedium, or worse, their failures and rejections. While they eagerly crowded around his computer to look at the Facebook page of his latest conquest, asking about the size of her breasts, they also felt the bitterness of their envy. The challenge came from Darren, the most married and most resentful of the drinkers. "I bet you can't sleep with Susan." "What are we betting on?" answered our main character. "What do you want?" "An evening alone with your wife." It should be noted here that our protagonist was not particularly attracted to Darren's wife, but he suspected that Darren suffered from certain illusions about how married he really was. He would enjoy cheating on his colleague. Darren, we also note, was angry at the self-confidence of our interesting man. However, Darren was proud of his calculating mind. There was little chance that Susan, the puritanical Christian in the office, would succumb to a sordid affair, and even if she did, he was sure that his wife, having only a superficial interest in sex, was unlikely to allow herself to be seduced. Two probabilities multiplied together constituted a sure bet in Darren's opinion. They agreed that letters and photographs would serve as evidence. They solemnly shook hands and invited their comrades to be witnesses. The whiskey brought out the usually hidden ancient need to rise above another person. So the bet was made, the die was cast, the future was planned. Meanwhile, Susan sat alone on the couch in her tidy home, watching a series on Netflix and playing a game on her iPad. Her husband was an accountant, although he always introduced himself as an accountant economist. He was working on a spreadsheet in a tiny office at the back of the house. He kept this office in order, every paper clip, pen and file had its place. The only sign of disarray was the locked bottom drawer in which he kept his grandfather's World War II pistol and a few mementos of a life he had only half lived. A wife is a curious creature, but Susan's husband, like most men of his type, was devoid of curiosity. Our protagonist, on the other hand, was a man of curiosity and knew that beneath the surface of every wife lies a woman, the most unpredictable of God's creatures. A woman gets married to resolve the issue. Susan's question was, "Will I always be alone?" Marriage answered this question in the negative. She found someone who could not and would not reject her. And she was right, the accountant was as dedicated to his obligations as he was to balancing the books. The problem, however, as many wives have discovered, is that once the issue is resolved, there is room for a new issue. To succeed in his quest, our protagonist had to find the woman hidden under the guise of his wife and become the answer to her new question. The following Monday morning, Susan sat at her desk in a noisy production hall, immersed in her computer screen, typing quickly, editing awkward texts from her coworkers. Our protagonist noticed her indifference to his presence in the room. She barely glanced in his direction. He was wise enough to realize that his usual opening ploy, sitting on the edge of the table and offering distracting chatter, wouldn't work with Susan. He knew that in her eyes he was a man without substance, a flirt, someone looking for an opportunity to get laid. His reputation, although often an advantage, was now a distinct handicap. He needed a new strategy. The next day, he sent Susan a letter asking for a favor. He used a businesslike tone, but indicated that the matter involved something that required confidentiality. Susan's answer was brief, also businesslike, but betrayed her curiosity. They met in the corridor near the elevators. Our protagonist explained that he was writing a proposal for a charity project and needed help editing it. He explained that his charity work is a private matter that his colleagues do not know about, and he wants to keep it that way. Of course, Susan said, glad that his request was so innocent, given his reputation as a ladies' man. I just heard such good things about your work and thought you would keep my secret. Susan tucked the manila folder under her arm and returned to her desk. That evening, she laid out sheets of paper on the kitchen table and began editing the pages our protagonist had accidentally downloaded earlier that day, checking only that they were poorly written, but not too badly written. Her mind drifted away from the task at hand, trying to reconcile a man with a reputation as a ladies' man and a man who proposed charitable projects to help needy children in the most remote corners of Africa. She concluded that office rumors are toxic and that people are too quick to judge. She shared her new knowledge with her husband, who muttered his agreement before returning to his long story. But something was bothering her, something she couldn't fully comprehend. The thing was, he had a reputation as a ladies' man, and she was a woman, and yet she didn't notice any interest from him other than her editing skills. Suddenly, she remembered the time when she looked with envy at beautiful girls, at girls who were desired, at girls who were owned. She remembered her teenage nights when she cried, tormented by her flat breasts, but this soon gave way to a more romantic quest to find love, a less dirty solution to the problem of her self-esteem. If she wasn't the girl who gets taken, she will be the girl who finds love. So love became the answer to her question, will I be lonely? But now that this fear of loneliness had been resolved, her teenage fear, the fear of being unwanted, arose again. Perhaps, after all, she thought I was unattractive, not rated in the league of available girls. Whereas before her scruffy, bespectacled, flat-chested self was invisible to the boys, now her demure, bespectacled, married self was invisible even to the office ladies' man. All she wanted was for him to notice her, to see her as a woman. Nothing more. Besides, as she told herself as she adjusted her sweater tighter than usual over her knee-high skirt, he was actually a good person. She waited anxiously all day for a response to her letter, informing him that the editing work was complete and that she was ready to discuss the changes with him. 10 minutes before the end of the working day, his answer came, and 15 minutes later, she was already looking on her phone for the bar he suggested for a meeting. It was a dark, masculine place with wood-paneled walls and rich red upholstery. It took her a moment to adjust to the light before she saw him, relaxed and already with a drink in his hand. He looked her over from head to toe, noticing her new, more revealing forms. He smiled with approval as she sat down. He nodded to the bartender, and a few minutes later she was served a cocktail. I thought we were going to work, she said, taking her first sip. We're working, he said with a boyish smile. She suddenly felt deceived, used by the office ladies' man. That's not why I came here. For what? I'm married, happily married. I see, he said, nodding towards her left hand. But actually, I'm here for a charity benefit, and well, I thought I'd thank you by buying you a drink. Nothing more. But this is the place, she said. It feels like a meeting. He laughed. Well, you're right, I guess. It's a meeting. Of sorts. I used to bring my dates here because it's secluded. I need to be careful with this too, he said, pointing to the stack of papers Susan had taken from her bag onto the leather table. I need to save my reputation, he laughed again, that same charming, boyish smile. Susan felt both relieved and angry at his conversation. He did not manipulate her into an unwanted encounter, but he again thought of her as a wife and not as a woman. Her new question now became urgent. Am I desirable? What if the office lady's man, even in such a place, with cocktails in his hands, does not see a woman in her, does not see her attractiveness? Our main character noticed the blush on her cheeks and neck. He leaned closer and spoke quietly enough that Susan had to put down her drink and lean in too. I know what people in the office are saying about me. And to be honest, I haven't always been, let's say, a good boy. But I'm trying to change, I really am. I understand the need to change. I can't live jumping from one woman to another. I got involved in charity work so I could start thinking about other people and not just myself. These changes are not easy. Old habits are difficult to overcome, even when you came in. What? She asked, lowering her voice to a whisper. I don't know. It was just a habit of, sizing you up. Oh, I didn't notice, she lied, blushing nonetheless. Our protagonist smiled to himself, leaned back, and said with a deep sigh, "Shall we start editing?" That night she lied to her husband. It seemed to her an innocent lie. He wasn't interested in her story about helping the office lady's man the first time, and so, she reasoned, why bother him the second time? To her surprise, her husband actually asked about it a few days later, but then the lie had already been told, and a new lie had to be told to protect the first. All wives lie, of course. However, there is a scale of lies, and Susan knew, without needing to explain, that her lies were on the high end of marital deception. She also found that even a lie that made the heart beat faster, the moment it was told, became comfortable after a few days and required very little further attention. Days passed, and despite her sincere checks of her mail, his name refused to appear. She became distracted, nervous, and irritable. Was she really that unattractive, that uninteresting? All she wanted was for him to make a move, to express desire for her, anything, even something rough. An intimate photograph would be sufficient. Then, she told herself, she would know. And then she could calm down again, resume her married existence. She was angry with him, rehearsing the refusal of his advances, anticipating the disappointment in his eyes. Meanwhile, our protagonist was calculating the interval between the cocktail and the next contact. Usually, he relied on instinct, because his usual conquests were as familiar to him as prey to a predator. Their every move was predictable in advance. With Susan, he felt much less confident. He noticed the blush on her cheeks and neck as he complimented her appearance, and it gave him a bit of confidence. The cross on her neck, nestled comfortably in the jugular notch, symbolized her inaccessibility. His instinct told him to wait, and wait a little longer. Susan collapsed onto the marital bed. It was Sunday, and the only sound was the golf TV channel downstairs. A few years ago, she happily gave up trying to enjoy her husband's sports hobbies. He didn't seem to care. In the dim light of an early spring day, her thoughts returned to her dilemma. More than a week has passed since the fateful meeting. Several times on Friday, she typed a message asking about a charity project, but as innocent as it sounded, she knew how he would take it. She wanted to be desired, not to humiliate herself by seeking attention. She would be as useless as the other women he used. Dignity, she whispered to herself. She was not going to sacrifice her dignity. Her thoughts wandered, but always returned to him. The women he slept with, women without dignity, who could not resist his stupid charm and feigned boyish nature. She assumed that sex with these women was erotic and played with these images in her mind, imagining him using these women like a stallion in a dirty movie, going from one to the other, endlessly horny, thrusting, grabbing, spanking, biting again and again. Bitches, that's what they were. Bitches. When she heard her husband making noise in the kitchen, she quickly buttoned up her jeans. Her breathing gradually calmed down, but a bright red blush remained on her chest and neck. Her husband called her from the stairs, asking if she wanted coffee. She was irritated by this question, this intrusion, this assumption of a quiet home life. She irritably answered in the negative. Our main character is tired of the question, "Are you all ready?" and hidden blame for failure. He hated to see Darren smirk as he passed him in the hallway. The worst were self-recriminations. He should have written the letter sooner. He should have made the move at the bar. But he kept coming back to the same argument. She was like a young doe, curious but ready to sneak away at any moment. Patience on the trigger, slow breathing, and a steady hand were the only options. To take his mind off her, he went to a club on the outskirts of the city. It was located in an abandoned factory, its bustle and work long ago transferred to a country with better weather and cheaper labor. He felt his age as he entered the huge hall, stripped to its beams, bare bricks, and useless pipes. For him, this place had the ambience of a slaughterhouse, but there were usually many women and often desperate ones. He didn't want to strain himself too much. He wasn't in the mood for this. He took a seat at the bar, where he could observe the dance floor and the makeshift booths around it. He sought out groups of women, groups of 3 and 5, often offering the best prospects, a birthday party, an engagement party, a meeting of old friends. There was always one left behind, not dancing, not crying in the comfort of a friend, someone lonely and jealous of the success and company of others. His prey crossed his line of sight, a clumsy girl, unsure of herself and a little drunk. She walked up to the crowded bar, trying, unsuccessfully, to get the attention of the busy bartender. Our main character smiled and beckoned to her, giving her a seat at the bar. She silently thanked him and placed herself between him and the bar. She was so close that he could smell her scent. He looked at her bare shoulder, noticing the faint brown freckles on her pale skin. She seemed fragile, vulnerable. The bartender still ignored her, serving only the loudest and tallest. "Let me buy you a drink," he said, moving his mouth close to her ear. "It's okay," she said, a faint smile appearing on her face. He leaned over her, touching her, and caught the bartender's attention. Soon she had a plastic glass with vodka, Red Bull, and ice in her hands. He led her through the crowd to a quieter area near the restrooms. Quickly, he established her position. Her friends were busy, and she was alone. She was studying for an associate's degree and working part-time. She wanted to become a cosmetologist. Her name was Autumn. She leaned against the wall as she told her story, her smile less intense, her gray-green eyes clouded from the alcohol she had drunk. He freed her from the awkwardness of loneliness, the shame of an unattached, lonely woman. The blaring music began to irritate him. He wasn't interested enough to maintain a feign of interest in Autumn's conversation. He pulled the trigger. It was too early, he knew, to make a move. But even so, he placed a hand on her thigh as he leaned in to better hear her tale of humble ambition. The risk of an early shot paid off, and he tightened his grip on her. She was easy to read now. She wanted a story she could tell her friends. She needed to get involved, be adventurous for once. The rest will be easy. He pushed her into the men's restroom stall and slammed the flimsy metal lock shut. He saw that she was very drunk. Her eyes were cloudy. Her mouth was relaxed. She sat on the closed toilet lid while he unbuttoned his pants. There were sounds of men urinating and talking all around as the door opened and closed, releasing pounding music into the echoing toilet. At his eye level was an advertisement for the theme night, showing 2 girls, arms linked, smiling, entering a brightly lit foyer. He thought the brunette was his type. There was a hint of intelligence in her eyes, perhaps a knowing smile on her lips. They had sex. He introduced Susan here. He buttoned his pants and waited for her to clean up before leaving the stall. He protected her by walking her back to the dance floor and her friends. As a gift, he waited with her for a few minutes so that her achievement would be confirmed by his presence. Then he left. In the dim light of the marital bedroom, Susan reached for her phone. Her husband lay motionless next to her, making his usual, quiet snoring. As this became her new habit, she checked her email first, her heart ready to be disappointed. Instead, his name, in bold, waited patiently at the top of the list of mundane work and family letters. She noticed that the letter was sent in the early hours of the morning. She could see the first few words. "Dear Susan, I would like." She looked at the unopened letter. What did he want? Did he want her? Did you want her? She wondered about his desires and whether she could satisfy them. The husband, who was just a lump in the bed, stirred in his sleep, irritating her by returning to reality. She carefully got out of bed, trying not to wake him. Like a thief, she silently closed the bedroom door and crept into the second bathroom. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, her finger hovering over our protagonist's bold name. He lay cursing the noisy disturbance that had jerked him out of his restless sleep. Crows called to each other from the treetops level with his windows in an apartment building on the other side of town from Susan. For a moment he thought it was Susan in the toilet stall, as his first thoughts were of her and his conquest the night before. But the persistent cawing of crows helped him finally wake up and untie his previously mixed thoughts. He had already forgotten the name of the girl from the toilet. However, he remembered his later letter to Susan and, feeling inexplicably nervous, fumbled for the phone. The dim light of the screen showed him a letter from Darren. He opened it, expecting its contents, but underestimating his negative reaction. Darren told him that the bet was over, that he had lost. Darren continued that he was a pathetic loser and that no one would believe his Valentino talk anymore. Our protagonist could almost see Darren's full, evil face as he wrote those pitiful words. Normally, he wouldn't have noticed, seeing it as further evidence of Darren's petty, evil nature. However, self-doubt, an unfamiliar feeling, grew until he threw the phone away. This feeling, however, followed him into the kitchen where he was preparing coffee. He was forced to reflect on his feeling that he was too old to be in the club, that he did not fit in with the crowd of young people swirling around him. He returned with the coffee to the small bedroom, opening the curtains into the gray Sunday morning. Unable to shake the feeling Darren's letter gave him, he promised himself to get his bike out of storage and start riding again. He was also planning to return to the gym. He wasn't too old. He's just neglected himself lately, too much time at work, and too much time with jerks like Darren. The phone vibrated, and he saw that Susan had answered. Susan pondered the meaning of his letter. He wanted to meet her for drinks to thank her for her work on a charity project. He added a winking emoji. There was nothing indecent in the letter except that wink. But at first she rejected its implications. She reasoned that it would just be a courtesy to thank her, nothing more. He probably put off writing the letter to avoid the hassle of thanking him. But he didn't need to ask her out for a drink. If it were true, a simple thank you would have been enough. Perhaps he felt guilty for taking so long to respond and decided that he should at least offer a drink. But then there was a wink. The wink meant something, she was sure. She composed several replies, deleting each one in turn. Finally, she wrote, "You went to bed late last night." A minute later, the chat opened, and he replied, "I went dancing with friends," he lied. "Oh, that's great. I haven't danced for a long time," she replied. "Every girl deserves to dance." She smiled at his description of her as a girl. "It's a pity that this is not so." "I would take you dancing," he replied. "Actually, I was thinking about you last night." "Is it true?" "Yes, your cute face popped into my thoughts." "Ah, now you're kidding me." "No, seriously, I thought I would really like you to be there." "You know I can't," she wrote. There was a long pause. She sat on the edge of the bathtub in the silence of the house, staring at the screen. Doubt crept into her thoughts again. Why would he be interested in someone who couldn't even go dancing? She imagined him in an elegant cabaret dance club, laughing at a table, surrounded by beautiful people. She felt the familiar feeling of worthlessness. The screen lit up again. "What are you wearing?" "Just a t-shirt and underwear," she replied. "I just got up," she explained. "I'm sure you look damn sexy." Lol. "Seriously. Don't be funny, my hair is a mess and I don't have makeup." "Well, I wasn't thinking about your hair." "Oh, really?" "Yes." She paused again, unsure of what to say next. She listened to the silence of the house, her husband just a few meters away across the hallway. It was just a game. No one was harmed. "What were you thinking?" she asked. "Do you really want me to say?" "Yes." "Even if it's dirty?" "Yes." She saw what he was writing and felt her heart pounding. Her hand reached for the gold crucifix on a chain. "That you are completely fit for sex, and that a new thing has appeared." No one had ever spoken to her like that. She was shocked, and at the same time felt a pleasant warmth spreading across her skin. She whispered the word "sexable" to herself. The next message from our protagonist lit up on her screen. "This was before I got involved in charity work, of course." She smiled. "I don't judge you," she wrote. "I love that you are such a good person, and at the same time someone who appreciates women sexually." She hit send and immediately felt embarrassed by how awkward her message sounded. There was a long pause. "Send me a photo." "Why?" "Because I'm thinking about you, about how hot you are, how attractive you are in your t-shirt and panties. I'll delete it right away, I promise." The first photo she sent showed Susan's reflection in the bathroom mirror. smiling, her hair tousled, one hand pulling her t-shirt up to cover her panties. "Oh God. Damn, you're so sexy. Another one has arrived. I do not have to." The next photo showed her standing with her back to the mirror, curled up, smiling, coquettishly bent over, exposing her ass, tightly clad in blue cotton panties, and the length of her snow-white, firm thighs. They exchanged a few messages before Susan agreed to take off her panties and t-shirt and sit on the edge of the bathtub. A sudden noise from the bedroom interrupted their chat. Susan hurriedly put on her clothes when she heard her husband calling her name, asking where she was. "I'm in the bathroom," she replied. She heard him stop at the door. "Why are you in the guest bathroom?" Susan's chest flared with rage. "I'm in the damn bathroom. What do you think people do in the bathroom? Why are you asking such stupid questions?" "Sorry," her husband muttered as he slowly walked down the stairs. A few minutes later, she heard the familiar sounds of breakfast being prepared. The last thing she wanted was her husband's kindness, but reluctantly, she pulled on some sweatpants and joined him in the kitchen. She rejected his attempts to start a conversation, and they ate in silence. While Susan was eating breakfast, our protagonist downloaded photographs onto his computer and attached them to a letter addressed to Darren. This should have wiped the smirk off his fat face and reminded him that it was a bad idea to speak ill of our protagonist, and especially bad to bet against his ability to seduce. For the first time in several days, he felt good. He still had that same gift. Whores in the club, available in the office, he could do everything. He allowed himself the luxury of reminding Darren of the terms of the bet. Now that he was sure the prize was close, he told Darren how much he was looking forward to taking advantage of his wife. Susan was furious and frustrated when her husband rattled dishes in the kitchen while cleaning up after breakfast. "I'm going to yoga," she announced, standing up and quickly leaving the room. 10 minutes later, dressed in her yoga suit, with a mat and a bottle of water in the back seat, she was driving aimlessly around her neighborhood. Once she parked, she took a deep breath and typed a plaintive hello on her phone. Soon she was nervously steering the car through the streets of the city center, anxiously checking her path on Google Maps. The large brown brick houses looked ominous and alien to her suburban eyes. The autumn wind blew leaves and sometimes debris along the sidewalk. Susan felt out of place, her anger at her husband and disappointment in herself gradually dissipating as the cold seeped into her parked and now silent car. Why shouldn't she visit a colleague? Why does she have to explain her actions? Why must her whereabouts always be known? Why is her husband making her a prisoner? Can't she do something for herself for once? Dusty concrete steps of a brick house and a building with a hint of abandonment. Susan found the bell with our protagonist's name on it, her finger pausing for a moment before pressing the button. The sound of the bell made our protagonist jump as he stood on a chair, setting up the computer so that he could shoot a video in the bedroom. The angle wasn't ideal, but placing the computer high on a shelf did the best job of hiding it unless Susan started exploring the room. He stuck a small piece of tape over the indicator light. Even if she notices the computer, it will be easy to explain. That's not to say our protagonist didn't have some hesitation when setting his trap for Susan. In fact, he was thinking about not recording it at all and letting Darren win. He knew the recording setup was wrong, but he also convinced himself that Susan would not be harmed, since she would never know. And besides, Susan made her own choices. He didn't force her to do anything. This internal moral debate was abruptly interrupted by the certainty that Darren would never leave him alone unless he succeeded with Susan. The cost of failure would be great. However, on the other side of the moral argument, there was something about Susan that fascinated him. She was just like the others, of course, just not the type he was used to. There was something about her that attracted him. Perhaps it was her sincerity, her integrity, which could instantly crumble into a flash of playful, conspiratorial laughter. Her tendency to blush, which betrayed a hidden, intriguing inner life. And now her body, so recently roughly exposed, demonstrated need and promised pleasure. A slight pang of shame at the mess in his apartment was soon replaced by pleasure as he followed Susan down the apartment's narrow hallway. Her ass was perfectly molded by the fabric of her yoga pants, as she moved toward the kitchen. He remembered her shy smile as she stood awkwardly at his door, and he connected the two moments, ass and smile, in a rush of anticipation of pleasure. Yes, it was wrong to put her in such a trap, but how well he played this difficult hand, and how sweet his victory would be. Susan felt as if she had crossed a border into a foreign country. It was both disturbing and exciting. She was sitting on a hard wooden chair near the kitchen window overlooking the street. She noticed a sink full of dishes and a trash can overflowing with pizza boxes. She fought the urge to clean up the mess and put everything in order. They tried several times to start a conversation, but each time it died down and the silence grew longer. Susan kept coming back to the idea that nothing had happened yet, and she could easily return to her car and continue with her old life. It would be her secret. The thought that something could happen would keep her going in the years to come. He offered her a drink, and she asked for a glass of water. He led her into the living room, assuring her that she would be more comfortable there. Her eyes landed on his bookshelf, filled with novels, and she moved closer to read the titles. He liked how she suddenly got carried away and forgot about his presence for a moment. He also realized that she was the first person who showed interest in his books. Susan pulled out a book and asked what it was about. He quickly explained the contents of the novel Dangerous Liaisons, after which she returned the book to its place. She stood up on her toes to see the top shelf and, turning her back to him, asked, "Did you like the photos I sent this morning?" "I really liked them," he replied. "Is it true?" "Yes, it's true. I also like watching your movements and hearing your voice." "Do you like my yoga suit?" "He is perfect. You are perfect." Susan turned and walked towards his outstretched hand. He pulled her towards him. He felt the warmth of her body, and she almost collapsed into his arms. Her eyes were raised, her lips were slightly parted, and her eyes were shining. "Our secret?" she asked. "Of course," he lied. "Certainly. I've never done this before." I know. She whispered his name and, looking into his eyes, said, "I want you to have sex with me. I want you to do everything you do with them. Make it dirty." He smiled and pointed her towards the bedroom. "Wait for me there while I get the drinks ready," he ordered. That evening, Darren sat alone on his couch, empty Bud Light cans littering the table in front of him. The Patriots game was slowly approaching its inevitable conclusion. His wife was chatting on the phone with her sister in the kitchen. A letter appeared on his phone with an archive attached. The subject line of the email read, "Now you bastard, I'll take care of your wife." Soon, behind the closed door of his home office, Darren pressed play and our protagonist's bedroom appeared on the screen. He fast-forwarded the video until he saw Susan enter the room. She undressed, pulling off her tight yoga suit, and, naked, fell face down on the bed. He watched them have sex. Our protagonist received Darren's reply to his letter while sitting at the kitchen table and listening to the autumn rain dripping through the drainpipe outside the window. He had no particular desire to have Darren's wife, but he was also determined to get his winnings. He was sure that winning her would be as simple as an invitation via text message. The summer before, at a barbecue at Darren's house, he suddenly found himself looking at her sitting on a lawn chair, chatting with a neighbor. Her short, tight denim skirt was lifted just enough to show off her inner thighs. He realized that he was caught. His lustful gaze was noticed by Darren's wife. He found her phone number and quickly, lazily composed a text message. Darren's revenge was swift after his wife casually mentioned that she was having a hen party on Wednesday and that he didn't have to wait for her. It took Google a split second to find and display Susan's husband's work email address. It took longer to load the large video file, but soon a sent message appeared. He leaned back, waiting for the sweet feeling of revenge to soothe the throbbing vein in his neck. Instead, his anger found a new target, his wife. She's no better than Susan, the same bitch in disguise. No one can humiliate Darren and go unpunished. Suddenly and unexpectedly, he felt that it was better to destroy everything than to live with this feeling of complete humiliation. The time horizon had narrowed so that he could not see or imagine the consequences of his actions as he rummaged through the garage in search of a suitable tool. our main character stepped out of the shower and took a moment to evaluate himself in the bathroom mirror. Not too bad, he thought, still feeling the excitement of his day's conquest. As he dried himself with a towel, his phone vibrated, signaling a message. The message from Susan simply read, "What have you done?" It took a minute to fully understand the scale of the disaster. In the simple language of the text, Darren revealed his betrayal. The accountant was on the way. Our protagonist's address was deduced from the crying Susan. "He has a gun," was the last message our protagonist received before he took up position behind the unlocked front door, baseball bat in hand. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.